I woke up to the sound of a moving truck outside my door. My son was in the living room with a couple I didn't recognize. He looked at me and said, "Mom, I sold the house. You're going to live in my garage now." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just turned around, went to my room, and made a phone call. 2 hours later, everything changed. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end, and comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has gone. The noise had started around 6:30 that morning, a metallic, heavy clatter that didn't belong in my quiet neighborhood. I sat up in bed, disoriented, wondering what could be making such a racket so early. At 61, I valued my sleep more than ever, especially after the sleepless nights I'd spent worrying about our family finances. My joints ached as I got up and went to the window. What I saw froze me in place. A massive moving truck was parked right in front of my house, with 2 men unloading boxes and furniture. For a moment, I thought they had the wrong address. Maybe they were moving in next door. But then I saw it. My favorite sofa, the one where I'd breastfed Felipe 33 years ago, being loaded onto the truck. My heart began to pound so hard it scared me. I ran into the living room in my nightgown, not even bothering to grab my robe. I needed to know what was happening. Boxes were stacked everywhere, marked with my name. My house, my home, was being emptied. Felipe was standing in the middle of the living room in his work clothes, phone in hand, checking something calmly as if it were just another Tuesday. Beside him stood a couple I'd never seen before, a blonde woman in her 40s with an elegant purse over her arm, and an older man beside her. They were glancing around the house with detached curiosity, like people inspecting a property they'd just bought. My stomach twisted. Somehow, I managed to find my voice, though it came out weak and trembling. "What's going on here?" Felipe looked up from his phone. For a brief second, I thought I saw hesitation, maybe guilt, but it wasn't that. It wasn't love either. It was indifference, as though I were a stranger interrupting a business transaction. "Good morning, Mom," he said casually, sliding his phone into his pocket. "I'd like you to meet Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, the new owners of the house." The words didn't register at first. The new owners, this house, the one where I'd lived for 25 years, where I'd raised Felipe after his father died, where every wall carried a memory, couldn't possibly belong to someone else. "I don't understand," I whispered. "The floor seemed to tilt beneath me," Felipe sighed, as if he were the one being inconvenienced. "Mom, I sold the house. We already talked about this. You can't keep living here alone. It's too big, and it's too expensive to maintain." My mouth went dry. "We never talked about that, Felipe. Not once." I grabbed the arm of the last remaining chair in the room, trying to steady myself. "But, Felipe, this is my house." He exhaled in frustration, adopting that condescending tone he'd begun using in recent years. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is. I've arranged everything. You can stay in my garage. Clara and I converted it into a small apartment. It even has its own bathroom." Clara. His wife. The woman who had never once given me a genuine smile in 3 years of marriage. The woman who always found excuses to keep Felipe from visiting me. Who treated me like an outdated relic from his past. The Morrisons exchanged awkward looks. They hadn't expected to witness this scene. Mrs. Morrison murmured something about coming back later, but Felipe stopped her. "No need. This will be quick." He turned back to me, businesslike. "Mom, the truck's here to take your essentials to my house. The rest we'll donate or sell." My essentials. As if my entire life could fit into a few boxes, I looked around. The living room where I'd spent so many nights reading while Felipe did his homework at the table, where we'd decorated the Christmas tree every December since he was 3, where I'd wept after losing my husband while holding my 12-year-old boy. "Felipe," I said, my voice trembling. Please, you can't do this. This house, Mom, he interrupted sharply, his tone clipped. The decision's made. The papers are signed. The Morrisons have paid. There's no going back. Something broke inside me then. Not just my heart, something deeper. The image I'd carried of my son, the man I'd raised with love and sacrifice, disintegrated before my eyes. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see my boy. I saw a stranger. A 33-year-old man in an expensive suit, cold and detached, who bore no resemblance to the child I'd held through nightmares, or the young man I'd worked 3 jobs to support through college. Without a word, I turned and walked to my room. I heard him say something behind me, but it didn't matter. I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed where my husband had died, where I had planned to live out my days. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. As it rang, an eerie calm washed over me. It wasn't resignation. It was determination. While I waited for someone to answer, I heard the muffled sounds of my belongings being packed, the life I had built being stripped away box by box. And as I sat there, I was transported back 21 years. To the day everything had changed forever. Roberto died on a Tuesday morning, a sudden heart attack at 42. No warning, no goodbyes. One day, we were arguing about whether Felipe should take piano lessons, and the next, he was lying lifeless in a coffin. I can still see it clearly, me standing at his grave, holding 12-year-old Felipe's trembling hand, promising silently that he would never go without anything he needed. That promise became the driving force of my life for the next 21 years. At first, it was unbearable. Roberto had been the family's primary provider, and my part-time job as an administrative assistant barely covered basic expenses. The mortgage on the house felt like a mountain I couldn't climb, especially when Felipe started joining sports teams that required expensive gear. I still remember the first difficult decision. Felipe wanted to play football, but the equipment cost $300, not including the helmet and pads. Money we simply didn't have. That night, after Felipe had fallen asleep, I opened my jewelry box and looked at the pearl necklace Roberto had given me for our 5th anniversary. I didn't hesitate. The next morning, I sold it for $250 and picked up a weekend job cleaning offices to make up the rest. When I saw Felipe's smile as I handed him the permission slip, I knew it was worth every extra hour of work, every sore back, every sleepless night. That was just the beginning, when Felipe turned 15 and showed an aptitude for math. I found a second job doing nighttime data entry for an accounting firm. I'd work from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., sleep 3 hours, then wake up to make his breakfast and drive him to school. On weekends, I cleaned houses to afford his tutoring classes. Felipe never knew about the night shifts. I told him I had insomnia, that I used the time to get ahead on chores. I didn't want him to feel guilty or grow up thinking we were poor. I wanted him to have a normal childhood, not one shadowed by my exhaustion. When college applications came, the pressure became unbearable. Felipe was accepted to 3 universities, but none offered a full scholarship. His dream school cost $25,000 a year, a number that haunted me every night. That's when I sold my engagement ring. The one Roberto had saved for months to buy. The pawn shop owner, a man who smelled like cigars, offered me $1,200. I took it. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I also mortgaged the house. Again, the bank hesitated. My income wasn't enough to guarantee repayment. I begged them, pleaded, told them my son was brilliant, that he was my entire reason for living. Eventually, they approved it, at a high interest rate, that forced me to get a 3rd job, caring for an elderly woman on Sundays. During Felipe's 4 years at university, I lived like a ghost. No dinners out, no new clothes, no holidays. Every penny I earned went to his tuition, books, and living expenses. When he called to ask for extra money for trips or parties, I always said yes. I worked extra hours, sold furniture, and skipped meals, anything to keep him happy and unburdened. His graduation day was the happiest day of my life. Watching him cross the stage to receive his engineering degree made every sacrifice worth it. I cried as I hugged him. "We did it, my son," I whispered. "Your father would be so proud." After college, Felipe landed a good job at a construction company. Finally, I thought, the hard years were over. I imagined we'd share peaceful evenings again. Maybe he'd even help me pay off the loans that had built his future. But that never happened. Felipe moved out to his own apartment and started visiting less. At first, I understood, independence was natural. But then he met Clara, and everything changed. From the first moment I met her, I knew she didn't like me. She was polite, too polite, her smile stretched thin and false. She looked at my house like it was too small for her taste, my words like they were quaint relics from another era. She always found excuses to keep Felipe from staying long when they visited. After they married, she barely hid her disdain. Felipe began to change too. His tone shifted, his patience faded. He started repeating Clara's phrases. "This house is too big for you. Mom. You're spending too much keeping it up. Maybe it's time you moved somewhere more practical for your age." I'd laugh it off, saying, "This house raised you. It knows every version of us." But now, standing in its empty shell, watching strangers take my furniture, I realized those had never been innocent suggestions. They had been seeds. Seeds of betrayal, planted slowly by the woman who'd never wanted me in their lives. I never imagined the child I'd sacrificed everything for would throw me out of my own home like an unwanted tenant. That's when I made the call. To my sister, Margaret. We hadn't been especially close in recent years, but she'd always been kind, practical, and blunt. When I told her what happened, her reaction was immediate outrage. "Adriana, pack your things right now. You're not living in that ungrateful brat's garage. You're coming to stay with me." 2 hours later, Margaret's SUV pulled up to my curb. By then, Felipe and the Morrisons were gone. They'd left behind 3 boxes labeled Mom's Essentials. Someone else had chosen what parts of my life were essential. They hadn't included the family photos from the mantle, or my wedding album, or even Roberto's letters. The drive to Margaret's house was silent for nearly 2 hours. I had no words for the emptiness inside me, and she seemed to understand that silence was safer than anything either of us could say. Only when we were close to her neighborhood did I finally speak. "Margaret, I need to ask you something," I said, watching the fields blur past the window. "Do you think Roberto would have wanted Felipe to do this?" She hit the brake so sharply that we both lurched forward, then pulled onto the shoulder and stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "Adriana," she said slowly, "please tell me you haven't forgotten about the will." A cold shiver ran up my spine. "What will?" "Roberto's will, the one he signed 3 months before he died." She searched my face, stunned. "You were there when the lawyer explained everything." The memory rose like a wave that had been held back for 21 years. Roberto had insisted on writing a will after his father's messy estate fight. We sat in Attorney Thompson's wood-paneled office, the old man with the pipe tobacco scent and thick glasses, while he went over everything. But grief had turned those days into fog. I'd been so focused on keeping Felipe afloat that I'd boxed up anything that wasn't survival. "Margaret," I whispered, dizzy, "I don't remember what it said." She exhaled, gentler now. "Roberto left you 2 properties in addition to the family home, a small house in Riverside he inherited from his Aunt Marley, and a downtown duplex he bought as an investment 2 years before he died. There's also a savings account that's been accruing interest all these years." I went still. It sounded like a story about someone else's life. That's impossible. I would have remembered. Attorney Thompson gave you all the documents, she said softly. You were shattered, and you said you'd handle it later. You put the papers in a box and never opened it again. The box. I could see it now, brown cardboard, tucked on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. I always thought it held old tax files and random papers of Roberto's. I never touched it because touching it hurt. Are you sure those properties are still mine? I asked, voice thin. Of course they're yours, she said. No one can take what Roberto legally left you. Thompson also set up a trust so the properties would be maintained and rent would deposit automatically. If that was true, then I wasn't a helpless woman who needed a space in my son's garage. I was an independent woman who had been self-sufficient for 2 decades, without knowing it. When we reached Margaret's house, the first thing I did was call Felipe. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. Felipe, it's your mother. I need you to bring me a brown cardboard box from my bedroom closet, top shelf. It's urgent. Please bring it tonight. He called back 3 hours later, still using that condescending tone he'd used that morning. Mom, you can't go into the house anymore. The Morrisons are moving in tomorrow. If you need something, tell me and I'll see if I can find it. It's a brown box with important documents. I said, keeping my voice even. Your father's papers. Silence. Dad's papers? Mom, Dad died 21 years ago. What documents could possibly matter now? Just bring me the box, Felipe. Please. Another pause. Okay. But this is the last time I'm allowed in. They're changing the locks tomorrow. At 10 p.m., Felipe arrived, with Clara waiting in the car. He carried the brown box to Margaret's porch and set it on the coffee table. I hope this is important, he muttered. I had to move a lot to find it. I waited until he left. Then Margaret and I lifted the lid like it might explode. Inside were exactly what she described: Roberto's original will, deed copies for 2 properties I barely remembered, bank statements from a savings account showing automatic deposits for 21 years, and a handwritten letter from Roberto addressed to me. I opened the letter with trembling hands. His familiar script hit me like a punch. My dear Adriana, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to keep the promise I made on our wedding day. These properties are for you, so you will never depend on anyone. I want Felipe to inherit when you are gone, but while you live, these are your resources to do whatever makes you happy. Don't sacrifice your well-being for anyone, not even our son. You are stronger than you think, and you deserve to live on your own terms. When I finished reading, Margaret and I sat in silence. Finally, she rested a hand on my shoulder. Adriana, do you realize what this means? I nodded slowly, as if waking from a 21-year dream. I had choices. I had power. I could choose my own life. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up in the guest room, reading every page in the box. The numbers stunned me. The savings account had grown to $47,000 from automatic rental deposits spanning 2 decades. The downtown duplex had been managed by a real estate company all this time, generating $100,000 a month in income. The Riverside house, smaller but in a strong neighborhood, yielded $900 a month. For 21 years, while I sold jewelry, took night shifts, and mortgaged my home to pay for Felipe's future, $100 a month had been quietly depositing into an account I'd forgotten existed. By dawn, I had a plan. First, I called the property management company. A woman named Patricia answered, professional yet warm. She confirmed the accounts, the lease terms, the maintenance schedule, everything. We've sent annual statements to your address, she said. Since you never replied, we assumed you were satisfied. The duplex tenants are excellent, 5 years without incident. The Riverside house was just renovated after the last tenant moved out. We could raise the rent to $11,100 a month now that it's updated. Next, I went to a different bank, one where no one knew my history of loans and thin margins. At Banco Nuevo, the financial advisor, a young man named David, reviewed the documents with growing respect. "Mrs. Hernandez," he said, "you're in a very strong position. With your rental income and savings, you could easily qualify for a new home mortgage, if you want one." I didn't want a new home. I wanted a true life. That afternoon, I drove to Riverside to see the little house Roberto had left me. It was small and charming, with a neat front yard and windows facing a park. The renovations were beautiful: polished hardwood, an updated kitchen, a spotless bath. It was perfect for a 61-year-old woman ready for a fresh start. Close enough to Felipe to be reachable, far enough to be free. The hardest step was deciding what to do about my son. For 3 days, I ignored his calls. He was worried I hadn't moved into the garage. Margaret told him I was processing, and I would reach out when I was ready. On the 4th morning, I called. "Felipe," I said calmly, "we need to talk. Can you come to Margaret's at 4? "Talk about what, Mom?" "Just come home. The garage is ready. We bought you a sofa bed." "I'm not coming to your house," I said evenly. "I have other options." A long pause. "What other options?" "Mom, you don't have a job. You don't have any money. I sold the house because you needed cash." "Felipe," I interrupted gently, "did you ever ask me if I wanted you to sell my house?" Silence, only his breathing on the line, the sound of someone finally realizing he'd built a story out of assumptions. "Come at 4, I said. "There are things you need to know." When I hung up, Margaret gave me a look I hadn't seen in years: pride. "Adriana," she said, "you sound like yourself again." She was right. For decades, I'd been the apologetic mother, grateful for scraps of time and consideration. That woman died the morning my son tried to move me into a garage. The woman who replaced her had a box full of proof, a plan, and the will to use both. Felipe arrived at exactly 4 o'clock, and, as I expected, he didn't come alone. Clara was with him. She walked in with that same false smile she always wore. The one that never reached her eyes. "Hi, Adriana," she said, her voice coated in sugar. "Felipe told me you'd been avoiding moving into the garage. I hope it's not because you think it's not good enough. We really put a lot of effort into it." Margaret, sitting beside me on the sofa, shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. My sister had never tolerated hypocrisy. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chairs opposite. "We have a lot to talk about." Felipe obeyed, looking uneasy, while Clara crossed her legs and leaned back, clearly irritated to be there. I placed the brown box on the coffee table between us. "Felipe," I began, "do you remember when you brought me this box?" He nodded. "Yes, you said it had Dad's old papers." "Exactly." I opened it and carefully pulled out Roberto's will. "Did you ever wonder what your father left me, besides the house where you grew up?" Clara's posture changed immediately. Any pretense of politeness vanished, replaced by alert curiosity. Felipe frowned. "Mom, I thought Dad only left us the house. You never mentioned anything else." I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. I didn't mention them because for 21 years, I forgot they existed. I was so focused on taking care of you, on sacrificing everything for your future, that I never looked closely at what your father left for me. I spread the papers across the table: deeds, bank statements, rental ledgers. Your father left me a house in Riverside, a duplex downtown, and a savings account where all the rental income has been deposited for 21 years. Felipe's face drained of color. Clara's eyes, however, lit up with calculation. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Felipe spoke, his voice small. Mom. Are you saying you've had property and money all these years? Not exactly had, I corrected. I've been receiving $2,100 a month in rent for 21 years. It's been accumulating in an account I didn't even know existed. Clara leaned forward abruptly. How much money are we talking about, exactly? I didn't miss the glint in her eyes. We're talking about $47,000 in cash, I replied calmly, plus 2 properties that have been generating steady income for over 2 decades. Felipe slumped in his chair, stunned. Clara tensed like a cat ready to pounce. Mom, I didn't know, Felipe stammered. I thought you were struggling. I thought selling the house would help you get cash. For what? I asked quietly. To survive in your garage? To depend on your charity? For the first time in years, I saw tears forming in his eyes. But I'd already cried enough for both of us. There's something else you should see, I said. Margaret, who had been silent until then, opened a drawer and pulled out a photo album she'd kept all these years. Show him, Adriana, she said softly. I handed the album to Felipe. He opened it with shaking hands. Each photograph was a chapter of my sacrifice, a smiling 40-year-old me, then a thinner version, dark circles growing deeper year by year. This, I said, pointing to one picture, was during your 2nd year of college. I'd lost 12 pounds from exhaustion. I was working 18 hours a day so you could study. I turned the page, and here, I had just sold your father's engagement ring to buy your textbooks for your final semester. Felipe slammed the album shut, as if the images burned. Mom, please stop. I didn't know. No, you didn't, I said, not cruelly. Just firmly. Because you never asked. Every time you called asking for extra money, I found a way. I never told you what it cost me. Clara, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. Well, that was your choice, Adriana. No one forced you to make those sacrifices. The room went still. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Margaret straightened, ready to unleash her temper, but I raised a hand. No, Margaret. This is my conversation. I turned to Clara. You're right. It was my choice, just like it's my choice now to decide what to do with my life and my money. Felipe looked up, his voice trembling with hope. Mom, if you have those properties, you don't need to live in the garage. You can move into one of them, and we can visit you. Felipe, I said gently, you still don't understand what happened. I stood, walking to the window to steady myself. For 21 years, I believed my worth depended on what I could give you. I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing everything, even myself. But Roberto tried to protect me from exactly this. He left me those properties so I'd never have to depend on anyone. I turned to face him. You sold my house without consulting me. You decided for me. You assumed I was poor, that I needed your help, that my opinion didn't matter. You made me watch strangers carry out my memories, and then offered me your garage like it was a gift. Felipe's voice cracked. Mom, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing for who? I asked. For me, who lost her home without warning. Or for you and Clara, who got a house free of mortgage and a mother conveniently stored away in the back. Clara shot to her feet, her false smile gone. Wait a second, Adriana. Don't make us the villains here. Felipe was worried about you. We thought you were struggling. Based on what evidence? I asked sharply. Clara hesitated. You always seemed worried about money. And the house was old. It needed repairs. The house was perfectly maintained, I said coldly. And if I seemed worried, it was because I was still paying off the loans I took to fund Felipe's education, loans I paid until last week. Felipe's head jerked up. You were still paying those? After 20 years? Yes, I said. The final payment was made 10 days ago. Shock rippled across his face. He looked like a man seeing his mother for the first time in years, and realizing how blind he'd been. Then I turned to Clara. You knew the house was paid off, didn't you? That's why you pushed so hard for Felipe to convince me to sell. Clara stiffened. I don't know what you're implying. I ignored her completely and faced my son. Felipe, when was the first time Clara suggested I sell the house? He frowned, trying to remember. After we got married. She said it was too big for you. That you could use the money to live more comfortably. And where did she suggest I live after selling it? Felipe hesitated, voice small. She said maybe you could rent an apartment. Or stay with us. In the garage, I finished for him. Clara's composure cracked for the first time. It was clear she had underestimated me, assuming I'd stay the meek, dependent woman she could quietly manage. She hadn't expected me to find my strength, or my fortune. Tomorrow, I announced, I'm moving into my house in Riverside. It's small, but it's perfect for me. And I'll be managing my own properties from now on. Felipe's face fell. Mom, please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can, I said softly. But not in the way you think. For 21 years, every decision I made was about what was best for you. Now, I'll make decisions about what's best for me. 3 months later, I sat on the porch of my Riverside house, sipping coffee and reading the morning paper. The garden, once neglected, was now bursting with roses I'd planted myself. It was a crisp October Saturday, the kind of morning that reminded me why I'd always loved this season. Calm, golden, full of second chances. The house was even more perfect than I'd imagined, small but bright, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a renovated bathroom that still smelled faintly of fresh paint. Most importantly, it was mine, fully mine. No mortgage, no debts, no obligations. Just me, my peace, and the sound of wind in the trees. Over these months, I'd rediscovered parts of myself I thought had died long ago. I began taking painting classes at the community center, something I'd always dreamed of doing but never had time for when I worked multiple jobs. I joined the local gardening club, where I met kind women who valued me for who I was now, not for the sacrifices I'd made. My days followed a rhythm I'd never known before, waking up naturally, not to an alarm, eating breakfast slowly, spending hours on things that filled me with genuine joy. It was a simple life. But it was my life, finally lived on my own terms. The phone rang, interrupting my quiet morning. It was Patricia, my property manager, now a trusted ally in this new chapter. Good morning, Adriana, she said warmly. I have excellent news. The tenants from your duplex want to renew their lease for another 2 years and are happy with the rent increase we discussed. I smiled. Perfect, Patricia. Go ahead with the renewal. After hanging up, I sat for a moment, reflecting. For decades, money had been a constant source of anxiety, something that defined my exhaustion and dictated my worth. Now, it was simply a tool, one that gave me stability and freedom, not fear. I had enough from rent and savings to live comfortably without working. But I still wanted purpose. So I began volunteering at an adult literacy center, teaching older women to read and write. It filled me with a kind of satisfaction that no paycheck ever had. Because this time, I wasn't doing it out of obligation. I was doing it out of choice. The sound of a car in my driveway pulled me from my thoughts. I recognized the engine immediately. Felipe's. He had been visiting every 2 weeks, always alone. That had been my one condition if he wanted to rebuild our relationship. No, Clara. Not until there was mutual respect. He got out of the car holding a small potted plant, another addition to the garden he'd started contributing to during these visits. It was his way of quietly saying, "I'm trying." "Good morning, Mom," he greeted as he climbed the steps. He looked better than before, less tense, more grounded. "Good morning, Mijo," I replied, using the affectionate word I hadn't spoken in months. He'd earned it back through patience and humility. He sat beside me on the porch, our now familiar routine. We'd share coffee, talk about the week, then work together on the garden or small projects around the house. Real conversations, not the hollow exchanges we'd once had. "How was your week?" he asked sincerely. I told him about my painting classes, a new friend from the garden club, and the progress my students were making at the literacy center. He listened closely, asking thoughtful questions. It was the version of my son I hadn't seen in years, the one who truly cared. After a while, he fell quiet. "Mom, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." I tensed slightly. We'd avoided deep conversations about the past, choosing instead to rebuild from the present forward. But I could tell this was important. "Clara and I are in couples therapy," he said, staring at the garden. "And I've been seeing a therapist on my own." I blinked in surprise. Felipe had always been too proud for therapy. "The sessions are helping me understand how I let things get so bad between us," he continued. "How I stopped seeing you as a person, and only as someone who was supposed to give." He took a deep breath. "My therapist helped me realize something, that for years, I treated you like my emotional employee, not my mother. I expected you to be available when I needed you, to sacrifice for my comfort, and to be grateful for whatever attention I gave you. I never saw you as an independent person with your own wants and boundaries." Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain, but from relief. After decades of silence, I was finally hearing what I'd longed to hear: recognition. "Understanding, Felipe," I said softly. "I appreciate that you're working to change." "Truly." He looked at me then, eyes raw and vulnerable. "Is there still a chance we can rebuild our relationship?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I think we already are. These visits, these conversations, the respect you've shown me, this is what rebuilding looks like." Felipe nodded, visibly relieved. "And Clara?" I asked after a pause. He sighed. "She wants to apologize to you. She's been asking for a chance to talk." "Maybe," I said thoughtfully. "But only when I'm ready, and on my terms." He smiled slightly. "That's fair." We spent the rest of the morning planting his new flower and rearranging the ones I'd grown over the summer. It was quiet, peaceful, a kind of healing you can't rush. When he got ready to leave, he hugged me tightly. Not the obligatory, distracted kind of hug I'd grown used to, but a real one, warm and sincere. "I love you, Mom," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to show it the right way." I felt tears again, but this time they were tears of peace. "I love you too, my son. And I'm proud of the man you're becoming." After he drove away, I stayed on the porch, watching the sunset bleed gold over the park. Children's laughter echoed in the distance. For the first time in decades, I felt completely at peace with my place in the world. There was no revenge in my story, no dramatic confrontation or punishment, only something far more powerful: the recovery of my dignity, the redefinition of love through respect, and the discovery that true freedom comes when you stop living for others' expectations and start living for yourself. That night, before going to bed, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out Roberto's letter. I reread it, smiling softly. He had been right all along. I had learned to live on my own terms. I had stopped sacrificing my happiness for others. And at last, I had found my strength. "Thank you, my love," I whispered to his photograph. It took me a while, but I finally found my way. For the first time in 21 years, I fell asleep not just content, but truly happy with the life I had chosen for myself.